What's going on, you guys? My name's Ty Knots and welcome to Top 5 Unknowns. 5 scary Reddit stories you need to hear. Number 5. This happened to my dad when he was 17. He ran away from home because he was in some sort of trouble. He never told me exactly what he had done, but I knew he had a pretty crazy youth. To escape getting into trouble, he went to London and stayed in a bar near the train station for a few hours, trying to figure out what to do next. Very quickly, he was approached by a man who sat next to him and kept buying him drinks. The man was kind, charming, and really seemed to empathize with my dad. He offered to let my dad stay with him for a few days free of charge. My dad says he really considered it, but changed his mind at the last minute because the man had been so kind to him and he decided it was just time to go back home. About a year later, he met my mother and they were watching the news when the same man popped up on the TV having been arrested. He then learned that the man was Dennis Nilsen. Apparently, when Nilsen appeared on TV, my dad turned ghostly white and started immediately shaking. Although it's not my experience, I'm always extremely careful and wary of people I don't know. Dennis Nilsen died in 2018, and for those of you that don't know, he was convicted of killing 12 young boys. Number 4. I was about 10 and a Cub Scout. Every year to raise money, my troop sold popcorn, usually door to door. A leader or one of our parents would follow us in his car and drive us to different neighborhoods so that we weren't completely alone while doing this. Often though, there weren't enough volunteers to chaperone, so the adult would wait at the end of the street and check up on us every 20 minutes or so. So we knocked on the door of this house and a woman answered the door but didn't fully come out. Instead, she cracked the door and looked at me and spoke through the crack. This wasn't particularly odd as most people weren't sure what we were there for at first, but the way she looked through the door was just different. I somehow didn't notice anything was off at the time, but her face was only half exposed and completely horizontal, which meant she was standing behind the door for some reason. I started going through my standard sales pitch, going on about supporting the troop and how high quality the popcorn was, but she stopped me and said in a very low voice, "Oh dear, why don't you come inside and tell me more about it?" Thankfully, I was a big fan of scary movies as a kid, so alarm bells started ringing. I asked her why she couldn't come outside, and her reply in that same low tone was, "I have cancer, I can't go outside." Now, I didn't know anything about cancer back then, and I knew it didn't sound like a symptom. But before I could say anything, she asked me, "Are you alone or are you here with somebody else?" I replied that my Cub Scout leader was just down the street, and as soon as she heard that, she shut the door and locked it without a sound. I kinda just forgot about it, filing it away as just some weirdo woman, so I didn't tell my parents or the leader about it. To this day, I still have no idea what she wanted me to come inside for, but I don't think it was anything good. Number 3. When I was about 10 years old and home alone, I was in bed taking a nap when the phone rang. I woke up to it ringing and I answered it. It started off with the man asking me questions like it was some sort of survey. Simple questions about random things. I was pretty out of it because I'd just woken up from a nap and I was quite young, so I didn't really know how to respond. But it quickly got really weird. I remember him asking me if I was home alone and if someone broke into my house, how I would like to be tied up, and what I would like to be gagged with, and what kind of object I'd like to be killed with. Now, I remind you that I was only 10 years old at the time and I had no idea what was going on. I remember getting very scared, but I just kept answering his questions for some reason. He was asking me so calmly. Finally, my mom came home into my room and asked me who I was talking to. I told her to get on the other line and listen in. It wasn't but just a few seconds after listening in that she told me where to go hide and hung up on the guy. Nothing ever came of it, but I've been thinking about it for years and years to come. It was one of the most creepy things that's ever happened to me. Number 2. I was 6 years old at the time, and I was sat in my mom's car that was parked on the street just outside of our house. My mom had run inside to collect something, and I decided to stay in the car. She was only in the house for a short while, maybe 10 minutes or so, but in this time, something weird happened. I was sat in the car playing on my Nintendo when I heard somebody tap on the window. I looked up, expecting it to be my mom, but it wasn't. It was a man from down the street. I didn't know him and I'd never spoken to him before, but I remembered instantly feeling uneasy. He then started saying things like, like, "Hello, pretty girl, I like your shorts. Do you want to go on a walk with me?" I almost immediately started crying. Next thing I knew, he was trying to open the door, but luckily it was locked. Looking back, I don't know if he would have done anything to me if it had been unlocked, but I'm just so relieved that it was. My mom arrived back at the car about 30 seconds later and stood outside the car for about 10 minutes talking to the guy, as she knew him and his family. By this time, I'd stopped crying and continued playing on my Nintendo. I didn't even bother mentioning it to my mom. Number 1. I had been in the middle of a call with my boyfriend at the time, and my parents were not home. I was talking to my boyfriend and then I heard a slam. I thought it was just my parents since sometimes the door slams behind them, but then I heard it again. I knew something was up. Now, since my house was small, we had sliding doors for our bedrooms and for our bathroom. I'd opened my door just slightly and saw a guy in the kitchen. He had a hoodie wrapped around his head. He turned to me and just stared at me. Within just a moment's glance, though, he was gone. He took off out the back door and I never saw him again. I admit, I ran after him and screamed. I was horrified and a mess. I wasn't thinking clearly and called my dad in tears just as they'd opened the front door returning home. They had to call the cops, who didn't even show up until about 8 p.m. that evening, despite my mother telling them that I was home when he broke in. They took fingerprints the next day, and luckily the guy's in juvenile detention now. Thankfully, this took place in Australia, so it was highly unlikely that the guy would have had a gun. I'm also lucky that it was just some kid. What if it had been an older guy, or a much larger guy? I'm certainly glad that I made it out without being hurt, but I make sure to double check the locks now when I'm home alone. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos.